All right, Alexander, let's talk about the situation in the Middle East
Mm.
and what is going on between the Biden White House and Netanyahu's administration. The defense minister was supposed to go to the U.S. and then he canceled his trip to the U.S. Talk about Biden speaking with Netanyahu. Talk about Biden speaking with Netanyahu, and Kamala Harris was also
Yeah.
on the call as well. And then we have the Telegraph article,
Mm.
which talks about the effectiveness of the Iranian missile strike. And finally, we have the video message from the Iranian, allegedly the Iranian president in exile.
Mm.
Obviously, preparation for regime change. At least that's how the neocons are
Mm.
positioning everything.
Mm.
Anyway, a lot of things to cover in this video. So
Mm.
let's begin with Biden and Netanyahu. I guess is a good place to start, or should we start
No,
with the Telegraph article?
I think we should start with Biden Netanyahu because this is perhaps where the mystery really begins. Because of course we had an Iranian missile strike on Israel some days ago. It was the Israelis made very clear immediately that they were going to respond and respond strongly. And well, we've been waiting some days. And so far, as of the time of making this program, we haven't had a missile strike or an Israeli counter strike on Iran. And I think that enough time has now passed for us to start asking why. Because the Israelis have been talking about strikes on Iran for decades. I mean, literally decades. We've had reports that the Israelis have been um, planning these strikes, that they've rehearsed them at various times. Um, and yet, so far, the strike hasn't happened. Instead, what we're getting is an awful lot of activity between the Israelis and the Americans. So, a top US military official, a general, is currently in Israel, and he's supposed to be coordinating with the Israelis what the kind of missile strike or counter strike that the Israelis are going to do is going to be. And we've had an awful lot of rumors, speculations, discussions, media comments about the fact that, again, things between the Americans and the Israelis aren't entirely good, and that the Israelis want to go further than the Americans want, that the Israelis are holding back information from the Americans. We've had an article about this in the Wall Street Journal, that the Israelis aren't telling the Americans exactly what their targets are going to be, that the Americans don't want Israel to attack Iranian nuclear targets, and that they don't want the Israelis to attack Iranian oil and energy installations, but that they're not sure that their advice is going to be heeded. And then, even as we have all those claims about a US general in Israel, apparently working out things with the Israelis, we get, firstly, this very strange business of the Israeli defense minister supposedly going to the US and then not going. And then a report in the Times of Israel said that Netanyahu forbade him from going to the United States until Biden had spoken to him on the phone. And then we got a readout from the White House after the call took place, which, as you correctly says, shows that Biden and Kamala Harris were both on the call. And I have to say, the readout is an absolute mess. It's all over the place. It says, on the one hand, the United States staunchly supports Israel. It condemns unequivocally the Iranian strike. It supports Israeli actions. At the same time, it says that Israel must moderate its actions, must try and avoid casualties, must work diplomatically to for a solution that will allow um, people in northern Israel and in southern Lebanon to return to their homes, even as fighting is continuing in southern Lebanon. It is all over the place. There is no coherence to it. It gives the impression of an utterly meandering and chaotic conversation. If this really does actually reflect the conversation that really took place. I mean, I've never read a readout that it was as confusing and as unstructured as this one is. And well, after that, we're left still waiting. And I'm going to say it. I mean, to me, this does give an impression of disarray. I know there's all kinds of people who are saying that the Americans and the Israelis have worked it all out and are planning it all out, and that this is all smoke and mirrors, and that the Americans are playing some kind of complicated game whereby they pretend to restrain the Israelis, but are really pushing them forward. The impression, on the contrary, that this is giving, and I cannot believe that any government in the world, certainly not the US government, wants to give this kind of impression. The impression it's giving, to my mind, is one of absolute chaos, of a US administration that is being completely left behind by events, where there are tensions between the president, perhaps, and the vice president, that they're not fully in working together, working in tandem on this. The vice president, obviously, concerned about getting herself elected in a few weeks' time, and of an Israeli government that is also, to some extent, divided, with the Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu not fully trusting his defense minister Gallant, and not willing to allow Gallant to speak to the Americans until Netanyahu himself has sorted things out with the Americans. So a very chaotic picture. And as you correctly say, we're at the same time getting all of these statements from people in exile, presidents in exile, clearly indicating that the neocons in the United States, who are absolutely there and who absolutely do want a big strike.
Crown Prince, I made a mistake.
Crown Prince.
Sorry.
The Crown Prince. Actually, the Crown Prince. He wants.
I said president.
By the way, that's about the one thing that I suspect would unite Iranians behind their government. I cannot imagine that people in Iran of any political persuasion want to see the monarchy restored. The monarchy was brought back to power in Iran in the 1950s, following a British and American backed coup. I don't imagine people in Iran want that all over again. But anyway, that's all by the by. The point is, the neocons, the monarchy, they clearly want to come back. They're pushing for this Israeli strike. Their objective, obviously, is some kind of regime change operation. I suspect that is what some people in Israel want as well. We've had talk about a sudden, unexpected, very precise Israeli strike, which to me looks like it could be intended as another decapitation strike, going after Iranian leaders. I mean, that sort of thing. But within it all, confusion. The Americans aren't clear about what the Israelis want to do. The Israelis, to some extent, divided them between themselves. The defense minister and the prime minister not fully working together. And a White House that has just basically lost control of events and doesn't look as if it's able to gain control of events. The Pentagon, I am sure, in spite of what everybody is saying, does not want a big war in the Middle East. They're probably deeply skeptical about regime change. The vice president's national security advisor, just to say this, he has written a big book, which has recently been published, saying that regime change in the Middle East is a very bad idea. It goes through all the various examples of attempted regime change that there have been in the Middle East, and it points out what a disaster that has been. If the vice president is elected in November, then this person who's just written this book will then become her national security advisor. when she becomes president. Just saying. So, I mean, one gets the sense everything is completely up in the air, or at least that there is no real focus or unity between all of these various groups, except, of course, that the neocons and the hardliners in Israel want to press forward. Maybe the Israelis are more focused on attacking Iran's nuclear facilities. The neocons want decapitation strikes to take out Iran's leadership. Both the Israelis and the neocons ultimately want regime change.
Yeah, I agree with you there. The options appear to be going after the nuclear facilities of Iran. I don't even know how they're gonna do that, or how successful that can even be, especially without the support of the United States. But I think that's one of the options that they're weighing. And yeah, the decapitation strikes. Absolutely. I think that's the other option that they're weighing. And it all comes down to what Netanyahu wants, I believe, whether he listens to the Biden White House or not. It appears he doesn't particularly care what advice the Biden White House gives him. From the Biden White House's side of things, I believe they've prepared their excuse, which is that Netanyahu is doing all of this in order to get Trump elected. I think this is their excuse they're going to go with. This is how they're going to explain the chaos. This is how they're going to explain their incompetence. This is how they're going to explain the complete mess that they've made of the region, going back one full year when they really messed up the entire diplomacy effort in the region. Going back a couple of years, I mean they've messed everything up. Biden, Sullivan, Blinken, but at the end of the day, I think they've already got the excuse already rehearsed and prepared, which is that Netanyahu is causing us all this trouble because he wants Trump elected. That's their go-to.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a demonstration of weakness and feebleness. But it's exactly what I think they're going to do. On the one hand,
people will believe it, though. They'll be a part of the U.S. population, and the media will run with it as well.
Absolutely. But I mean, in a kind of a sense, they're already telling us in advance by saying all of this that they know that this is going to fail. Whatever it is that's going to be attempted, it's not going to succeed. As I said, the vice president, Harris's national security advisor, has just written this massive book talking about how regime change in the Middle East doesn't work. So, I mean, one can already see that there is uncertainty. And of course, whatever it is that they try to do, even if it's successful at the start, when they are already divided and arguing with each other in this way, they will, that doesn't suggest that ultimately this is going to work out well. We're going to end up in a situation where everybody's blaming everybody else. And the neocons will say that it's dithering, that the US government has been too soft and too weak, and they're not going all in, and they're not providing all the backing to Israel that Israel needs. And the Israelis will probably be saying the same thing, except that the Israelis also look divided with each other, at least to some extent. And of course, the neocons ultimately, and Netanyahu ultimately, in these kind of conflicts, always get their way, and they will very quickly have their narrative prepared. The reason the decapitation strike, the attack on the nuclear facilities that started this conflict weren't as successful as we were led to expect is precisely because Biden didn't go all in at the beginning. The big question, because I agree, Netanyahu is going to make the decision. He's got the backing of the neocons. He's going to make the decision. There will be a strike. It will come soon. The big question is, why is Netanyahu still waiting? Why is he talking to the Americans? And I think there's two reasons for this. Firstly, I mean, he knows what a huge country Iran is. I mean, we're talking about an enormous country, very mountainous, 88 million people, with, a sprawling industrial base, lots of underground facilities all over the country, probably deep bunkers in Tehran. He needs the Americans to provide his forces with the intelligence and the powerful bombs, the weapons, and all of that they need in order to try and carry out these strikes. But the other thing, and here we come back to your point about the Daily Telegraph article, is we now have a lot more information about the Iranian strike on Israel. And with every piece of information that we get, and this is the most comprehensive and detailed article that we've been provided up to this point, and it's appeared in a newspaper, by the way, that is very, very pro-Israeli, just to say, and also which is believed to have very strong connections to the British military and security and defense establishment. But, they're also providing a great deal of open source intelligence, open source analysis, and they're telling us that this Iranian strike actually was very effective, that at least 30 missiles got through, that all of the missiles were hypersonic, that they hit their targets, and that they caused real damage. And they're saying that the Israeli air defense and missile defense system was only partially effective, and that the Iranians were able to get round it. And that if the Iranians were to carry out a more powerful strike, one that was more focused on potentially civilian targets, lots of people would die. So I wonder whether underlying everything, all of these rather strange discussions we're seeing between the Israelis and the Americans at the moment, all the discussions that are taking place in Washington and Jerusalem, all the divisions between, people like Biden, the Neocons, and, Biden himself is hardly a moderate figure. You would expect that he would want to go all out. But I wonder whether what it is that people have been really, really shocked by how strong this Iranian strike was, that it was more powerful than they expected and than they are letting on, and that they're more worried. They're more worried about what Iran might do than that they led us to think before. So that's and at the same time we have all this fighting going on in southern Lebanon about which we know very little, but it's also clear that Hezbollah, for the moment at least, has absorbed the blows, and it's still there, and it's still fighting, and it's fighting fiercely. So the worm of doubt is there. People are starting to worry. Maybe it's not going to be quite as straightforward and as easy as it looked 2 weeks ago.
Yeah, but the whole Biden thing doesn't make sense to me either. That was actually the question I was going to ask you. Mm-hmm. They're worried of Iran's apparently they've seen that Iran can strike back, and they can strike back hard. So they're worried. That's basically what you're saying. But it never stopped Biden in escalating with Russia in Ukraine. I mean, if Iran is if they believe that Iran has some strength, well, God, Russia's the number one nuclear power in the world. It hasn't deterred Biden from escalating with Russia. He's obviously not worried about a nuclear war. He'll escalate with Russia as much as he can. Biden is a neocon.
Yeah.
He's a hardcore neocon. Yes. Always has been, always will be, and his entire team are neocons. Okay, maybe they're more neoliberal / neocons, guys like Blinken, but they're neocons now. There's no difference now between the neoliberals and the neocons. And when it comes to escalation, they're all in, especially with Project Ukraine. They've been all in for escalation with the most powerful nuclear power and one of the most powerful, if not the most powerful military in the world. It hasn't deterred them. It hasn't scared them. It hasn't spooked them off. Why with Iran is Biden being more cautious? Even if he saw the power of Iran's strikes into Israel, as is being documented by the Telegraph. It's not us saying this. No. It's the Telegraph.
It's the Telegraph
which is saying this.
It's
the Telegraph. It's not us.
That is a very important
We need to be clear.
We are not us.
It's
not us at all. I mean, go to the Telegraph. You can find the article there. It's all thoroughly laid out. They're saying quite clearly that this was a much more devastating, and they're saying that another Iranian strike might be devastating. That's them, and they're doing this analysis.
So is Biden cautious? Is Biden, the neocon, not cautious with Russia and escalating with Russia, but he's cautious in escalating with Iran? That something doesn't fit. I mean, he doesn't like Netanyahu. He doesn't like Putin.
No.
I mean, there's some other reason for the Biden White House taking a restrained, is that the right word? A more restrained approach when it comes to Israel's retaliation against Iran?
Right. I think the solution to this puzzle, and I agree it is a puzzle, and I mean the whole thing that we've seen over the last couple of days is, as I said, it looks chaotic and all over the place, and at some level it is very strange. I agree. They're not going to be ultimately deterred by this. It may be that they've been, taken by surprise by how effective this Iranian strike was. In fact, I've no doubt they were. But it's not going to stop them. And with this administration especially, which is, to be clear, the purest neocon administration we have had, more so even than the George W. Bush administration. With this administration, I mean, you could say that there is always going to be a structural bias towards escalation. They will always escalate. That is what they will ultimately do. The reason there's pause is twofold. Firstly, they have an election in November, and they have to worry about what might happen if there's a major blow up in the Middle East between now and the election. There are reports that they're having some problems in the election. But beyond that, if there's a major war in the Middle East, if this becomes more protracted and complicated than perhaps they believed it would be a few weeks ago, then, we might see oil prices rise. Oil prices have already risen. They might rise further. That might put pressure on the pumps in the United States. That might affect the way people feel about the election. It might have an effect in places like Michigan and other places. I don't think that should be discounted, by the way. I think that people like Sullivan, despite everything, they are still concerned about that. They still want the vice president to win. And remember, she was there on the call. So that's one thing. The other thing is, I think the Pentagon, which, to be absolutely clear, are not moderates. They're not softies. They're not people who, would naturally urge restraint or anything like that. But the Pentagon is looking at this. They're saying, look, we've had Ukraine. That didn't turn out very well. We've given Ukraine huge amounts of weaponry. We've given them air defense missiles. We've given them ATACMS missiles. We've given them tanks. We've given them HIMARS. Now we are being asked to help Israel. We're already short of air defense missiles, and we've seen what Iran can do. We've already got problems with our fleet. We've had to keep aircraft carriers, US Navy carriers, floating around the Middle East for months. We've even had a situation a few weeks ago where, because we were deploying all our carriers, all our available carriers to the Middle East, we didn't have any in the Pacific. Our objective, our real concern is not the Middle East. It is about this big war that we expect to fight at some point, 2027, according to one US Navy report. This big war that we expect to fight with China in the Pacific. That is the major conflict. That is the real adversary. And here we are being asked again to assist in a neocon operation in the Middle East. We've seen repeatedly that these don't end up well, that they're a major, that they come with a major cost, and they draw down resources. And for that reason, we're urging a pause. And there are lots of reports in the media that Lloyd Austin, who's a US general, and by the way, an absolute hardliner himself, we shouldn't, again, run away with the idea that Lloyd Austin is any kind of moderate. He apparently was furious when he got reports that the Israelis had assassinated assassinated Nasrallah. He said, why wasn't I told about this in advance? Why weren't we informed in advance? Why weren't we properly briefed? We don't want to be put in this situation all over again. And I think that's where the biggest block is coming from. I don't think it's going to be enough, but I think that is probably the single biggest factor over and above the electoral issue.
Yeah, if I had to take a guess, I would say that you have two strains of neocons fighting it out right now. Yeah. I'm being very simplistic in this description, obviously, but I think you have two strains of neocon ideology that are fighting it out. The one strain is obsessed with Russia and sticking it to Russia and regime change of Putin and escalating to all-out war with Russia. That's the first strain, of which I believe Biden is a part of. Yeah. Absolutely, Biden is a part of that neocon ideology. And then you have the other neocon ideology, which is the Iran obsession. And they want regime change with Iran. They want all-out war with Iran. And these two neocon factions are fighting it out because they've understood that resources are finite.
Yes. I
think it's finally dawned on them that, we don't have unlimited resources and money and weapons and missiles. They finally understood that from Project Ukraine, that it's not unlimited.
Not that they're ever going to publicly admit it, and that is the trouble.
No,
because
they always, deep down inside they know it.
But they do know it, and the Pentagon, of course, absolutely knows it. They understand that the United States cannot afford another protracted war in the Middle East when already stocks of especially air defense missiles are low. They've seen that Iranian missiles do get through. And they're asking themselves, if we're going to get into another conflict, how are we going to stop these missiles if we're already so short of Patriot missiles? So I think this is the whole explanation for all of the doubts and uncertainties that we're seeing at the moment. But, to be absolutely clear, despite these doubts, Netanyahu was going to get his way. The neocons in Washington are going to get their way, because what they're going to come back and say is, put aside all the doubts. Don't worry about the resources. Iran is a house of cards. The regime there is unpopular. Its internal security systems are fragile. All we have to do is hit them hard in a few places, take out their nuclear facilities, take out their leaders, and the whole thing will come tumbling down. It's what the neocons always say ahead of every war. And it never quite turns out the way they expect, but they always win this argument. It's one of the most frustrating things this book, as I said, which Harris's national security advisor has written, makes that very point. But I nonetheless confidently predict that these people will prevail and that we're going to get this big strike. And it's not going to be a token strike. It's going to be a big strike. And the Americans are going to be involved in it. And we're going to see all the things that Netanyahu wants: decapitation strikes, attacks on nuclear facilities, and all of those things. And then, of course, the war in the Middle East will begin in earnest.
I'll add to that, Alexander. I agree, and I will add to that. I believe the neocon faction that wants war with Iran, they're telling Biden, who's part of the neocon faction that has been trying regime change in Russia and trying to get war with Russia, they're telling Biden, it's over.
Yeah.
They're not saying it like this. They'll never admit it, that they lost, but they're basically telling Biden, enough with Project Ukraine.
Yeah.
Let's get off of this escalator. And let's get on to the Iran escalator, which is a war, as you said, that we can win. That is a house of cards. Everyone will forget our defeat in Project Ukraine because we'll have Project Iran, which is a slam dunk victory. And all the indications are that the Biden Neocon faction, which is obsessed with Project Ukraine, that they're doing exactly that. They're canceling trips to Germany. They're ignoring Zelensky. They're getting the hint that Project Ukraine is over, but let's quickly move to Iran. It looks like the neocon school of escalation with Russia is going to lose out to the neocon faction, which is obsessed with Iran. I mean, I think we're seeing the indications that this is what's happening. So yeah, that's what they're telling. I think that's what they're telling Biden and Blinken and all of these guys. Forget Russia. It's over. Let's end this and let's transition to Iran.
Let's transition to Iran. If we could take out Iran, and they always talking that way, if we could take out Iran, then, well, it's not quite as big a deal as if we took out Russia, but it's still a big deal nonetheless. We're going to affect China's oil imports. We're going to disrupt the BRICS, exactly, and Eurasian construction and all of that. And, it will still be a massive victory for ourselves. The point is that if all of these doubts already exist before this project has even started, then that already tells us that this project isn't going to end well. I mean, that's perhaps the big take that we should make from the fact that, as I said, we've had, all of these days of dithering. But they will be resolved, and the strike will come, and the war will happen. Netanyahu himself has been pushing towards that war for weeks now, exactly as we predicted. And we are now on the brink. I mean, we really are on the brink. Netanyahu himself, by the way, is starting to look nervous. I mean, he's a clever man. But I saw him reading out some comments, and I noticed that his hand was shaking, just to say.
Yeah, well, I also think that Ukraine and Zelensky also understand that the resources are going to shift to Iran.
Yeah,
I think the movement is going towards Iran, and everybody, even the Europeans, NATO, they all understand that everything is shifting towards Iran.
Exactly.
Yeah.
The next war.
All right. Yeah. Yeah. Go ahead.
The next war. I mean, you lose one war, start another. That is the basic Neocon mantra. And never admit to any mistake, ever.
No, the media just stops reporting on Ukraine.
Exactly.
And
Switch
they
off.
become obsessed with Iran. Yeah.
Switch off the story.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
I mean, the vice president has already said that Iran is the US's biggest enemy. So it's not China, it's not Russia anymore, it's Iran.
They're also interfering in the U.S. election now as well, and they're also involved with trying to take out Trump.
Exactly.
We've gotten these reports of Iran as well. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah.
All right, we will end the video there. The Duran.locals.com. We are on Rumble, Odyssey, BitChute, Telegram, Rockfin, and Twitter X, and go to the Duran shop and pick up some merch like what we are wearing in this video today. The link is in the description box down below. Take care.